Hello, welcome to the Book Sandwich Den, sponsored by the Friends of the Tulsa City County Libraries. My name is Dorothy Miner, and I have the honor of being the president of the Friends. We're delighted you're here today. And if you're not a member of the Friends, we have some information over here to my right. If you are a member already, thank you, and consider giving a gift membership. Please come back next week for our book talk over stolen focus, about our loss of focus and how to regain it. It will be here in Aronson. And then our last book talk on tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow will be held at Heirloom Rustic Ales, 2113 East Admiral Boulevard. So that's an evening program. Come at 6 and the program will begin at 6:30. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Sarah Dawson, who will talk about Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. Sarah has a Master of Library and Information and Science degree and worked as an elementary school librarian before switching to public libraries. She's the Broken Arrow branch manager and reads an average of 174 books a year. So you pikers, take note. Something she did while on the high school Sequoia selection committee in 2018 and has maintained every year since. In her spare time, she sometimes, sometimes while reading, she knits sweaters and crochets blankets. She also loves saving seeds from her garden and donates hundreds of seeds to the TCCL Seed Library. Her favorite genres are those that include speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and magical realism. However, she reads a bit of everything and creates custom Your Next Great Read guides for customers of the library. If you've never done that, you should try it. It's great fun to get those recommendations. She also runs the Cover to Cover book club that meets at the Broken Arrow Library. Please welcome Sarah Dawson.
Okay. Hello, and thank you for having me today. And thank you to the Friends of the Tulsa City County Library for hosting this event. So as I had to do a little thing to make sure I can see all my notes. Okay. So yeah, I'm Sarah Dawson, and for today, in Book Sandwich Den, I'm going to present Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. If any of you were wondering how to pronounce that, her Twitter handle is literally pronounced Ng, like ING in all caps, because everybody gets it wrong, but it's Ng. So Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng, and just because I'm curious, how many of you read this book? Nice, okay. I made, for the Cover to Cover book club, I had them read it so that they could help me analyze it a little better for this presentation. But we do something in that book club where we give a thumbs up, a thumbs middle, or a thumbs down on how we feel about it. So if you're comfortable doing that, no judgment, but how did you feel about this book? This is actually kind of what I expected, because in my book club, we were pretty evenly divided on how we felt about it. But as you can see, I did enjoy it, though I think I'd rate it more if I enjoyed it because I think it's a very important book than I think that it was enjoyable to read. So if you read the author's note at the end, and if you didn't, I highly recommend that you go back and do that. You can see why I think it's so important, but we'll talk about the author's note at the end. So I'd like to start this presentation by talking a little bit about the author. There we go. So this is Celeste Ng, and this picture came from her about page on her website. She was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and grew up there and in Shaker Heights. She went on to graduate from Harvard and obtain a Master's of Fine Arts from the University of Michigan. Also notable, she was awarded a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and a Guggenheim Fellowship. Before she wrote novels, she wrote short fiction and essays for tons of different publications, including the New York Times and The Guardian. Now she's written 3 novels, and each of them became New York Times bestsellers. So the first one was Everything I Never Told You. That was published in 2014. It was about a Chinese American family who was rocked by the death of one of their daughters. And it also won Book of the Year in a lot of publication lists, including NPR and Booklist. So being a breakout debut novel, it skyrocketed Celeste Ng to a lot of critical acclaim. Her second novel was Little Little Fires Everywhere, about a very orderly neighborhood in Celeste Ng's home childhood town of Shaker Heights. And it's divided when a couple decides to adopt a Chinese American baby. This novel got even more acclaim than the first one, and it also became a Hulu limited series adaptation. And then her third novel is the one we're going to talk about today. It's called Our Missing Hearts, and it was published in 2022. It was also a New York Times bestseller, but it was not as popular as the first two. And I kind of have to wonder if it's because the subject matter, this one, is not as smooth or polished. It also, the points it's making are not as oblique. They are designed to cut a little deeper and maybe even hurt. It's a dystopia. So it's directly in response to current happenings in our own country, and it's a prediction of the sorts if we continue down the same path that we're already on. So in short, this book is a warning. Okay, so first I want to shout out the artist of the next two images. This is Dina Soote, and she did the illustration for both of these slides. I pulled it from the New York Times article that was discussing Our Missing Hearts. So what is Our Missing Hearts about? The story centers on a 12-year-old boy named Noah, but he also goes by Bird, because that's what his mother called him, and his father tells him it's a nickname that he needs to let go of. He's being raised by his father after his mother left when he was 9. After he left when he was 9, and then she never came back. His mother is a wanted PAO, which is a person of Asian origin. In this world, America came to hate the Chinese, but that generalized to all Asian people because hatred has a habit of spreading by generalizing. So this story starts very slow. It puts the reader very much in the point of view of a young boy who doesn't know that the world he lives in has ever been any different. And in fact, this world is in the not too distant future. It's 10 years after something called the crisis occurred, and the Preserving American Culture and Traditions Act, or PACT, was passed. So to break that timeline down a little bit better, Bird was born during the crisis, but he was too little to remember it. The crisis ended with the passing of PACT, and then 7 years later, when Bird is 9, his mother leaves. Now it's 3 years after that, and he's 12, and PACT is now a decade old. I point this out because the world, like this world, it was transformed slowly, but yet still insidiously, with the time-tested method of making horrible things more palatable if the bites are small enough. So Bird knows that the three of them lived in a house altogether very happily before his mother left. She was a published poet, though not one of terrible renown, and his father was a language professor at Harvard University. Now, though, he and his father lived in a tiny little dorm room up on the 10th floor where the elevator is always broken, and they sleep in bunk beds. It's still Harvard University, but now his father works and does kind of clerical stuff in the library. The world is oppressive. It is tense, and it's very routine. So reading the beginning of this really reminded me of Lois Lowry's The Giver, because it felt very devoid of color. Nobody wants to stick out at all. Everywhere you go, you're encouraged to report behavior that doesn't seem right. So it felt very reminiscent of that book. So if that's the shades of gray, then the pops of color in this book are the artistic protests that authorities do their best to erase from existence as quickly as they seem to pop up. One example that you see early on is a tree that's yarn bound with a web of red yarn, and then there's little red hearts dangling from the strands and the branches. These all have something to do with a line from one of his mother's poems, which is about our missing hearts, though he doesn't really understand what that means. After Bird and his father witness a different artistic protest, usually red is the color, but they witnessed that in the courtyard of Harvard, just outside the dining hall. The claustrophobic feeling in this book really intensifies. His father even has to defend Bird because it's clear that he is Asian, and he does it in a pretty violent way that really shocks Bird to his core. After all, his father is a lover of words, and he's never raised a hand against Bird ever. So this, more than anything, I think, or anything else, I think really starts to make Bird think about the world that he lives in and how it's pretty scary. Like, I don't think that he was having a great time, but I think that's the moment where he's like, oh, it's really bad for me personally. And then another point of concern for Bird is he's very sure that he's received a letter from his mother, although she couldn't have signed it because in this world, letters are read and reviewed to make sure that they are appropriate before they are sent on. So it's his best guess, but he's pretty sure it's her. And he knows he can't tell his father about it because ever since his mother left, his father has made it abundantly clear to Bird that they have to erase her from their lives. What comes from a place of, I think, love and protection on the father's part has been translated to kind of hatred in Bird's eyes, because he doesn't understand how dangerous it is. And I found this actually to be very understandable for both of them. After all, can you even imagine telling a 9-year-old, we just can't talk about mommy? Like, we love her, but we can't talk about it. We all know kids. They can't handle that. So instead, his father does a real hard line of like, she's not in our lives. She's not important. She's not anything to us. She's totally dead to us. Because it just makes it to make it a habit for a child. It's really sad and it's really unfortunate, but I do understand why he did that. And then the tension between the two with the father's attempt to control what the boy knows and the way the boy fills those gaps in really drives what happens next. Because since his father won't tell him about his mother, Bird decides to find out for himself. Some major characters in this book are, of course, Bird and his father, who we've already talked about, but there's some other ones that are notable. Sadie, his best friend in school, when she disappears from his life after showing deviant behavior, and of course that behavior being that she remembers her parents and she wants to get back to them. So she acts out hoping that she will eventually get taken back. Because it's revealed, and this doesn't run too much of the story to say that generally when the characters are talking about our missing hearts, they're talking about kids who were taken away from their parents. And so Sadie is really Bird's direct tie to that because it's not something that's talked about. It's not something that's really discussed. But him having this friend who then disappears helps him understand that this is happening. And the families that they're taken from, they are deemed unpatriotic or dangerous in some way. They're not compliant with the Pact Act, and thus they're unfit to be parents. So the parents are often silent because they think maybe if they're good enough, they will get their children back. But I mean, outside of that, he doesn't really have a concept for other kids in their home lives, So there's also a librarian, who's part of a network of librarians who try to connect people with the information that they want most, that being where their children are. So I really loved that the librarian points out that a librarian's real job isn't just helping you find a book, it's helping you find information. And then of course there's Bird's mother, and she's able to tell her story and reveal why she had to leave and what she's been doing since. Bird's mom is also the only other real point of view character, which is interesting, but it's still her telling her story to Bird and him relaying, but it's pretty into her point of view. There are some recurring themes in the book. One is libraries. Now, a lot of people, not you all, of course, but a lot of people, whenever I am out in the wild, so to speak, and I tell them I have a master's degree in library science, they either don't believe me, think it doesn't exist, or they think, why do you need a master's degree to read books all day? Now, I always laugh and I tell them, like, wouldn't that be the dream? Because wouldn't it? But no, actually, my degree is how to create and navigate databases, and actually find out how people search for information so that you know how to make it accessible to them. And it's also how to catalog things, which if you know anything about cataloging, it is an ethical nightmare. It's very important, but it is incredibly hard. So, it's a Master of Information and Library Science. It's not a Master's of Literature. So all of this, relates to tagging information for retrieval, and it has very little to do with reading at all. So I want to say bravo to the librarians of this novel who are using their knowledge for good. And thank you, Celeste, for knowing what it is that we actually do. But what's interesting is that whenever I explain this to people, because I always explain, no, this is what I do and this is why it's important. They always go, well, yeah, I guess that does make sense, doesn't it? And when people need help, they do go to the library. Every day we have people who come in and they come asking about things that have nothing to do with books at all. But libraries are kind of unconsciously a place of knowledge, not just a place where you can check out a book. So people, I think, do know that. It's just one of those things where it's not immediately in their face, so they don't really know until you tell them. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think the world the world that she's created is kind of the same way. So in Our Missing Hearts, they have libraries and people know that they can go to the library to get knowledge. However, in this world, free access to information doesn't exist anymore. The illusion of it exists because libraries still exist. But the materials that don't fit into Pact's narrow and more narrow view of what is safe and patriotic are pulled from the shelves. So I already mentioned the library, well, and all of that to say, like, people still go there though. It is still a place that people go, even in this world where it's scary. And Bird actually gets to go to a couple of different libraries. So at all of them, there's huge sections of the shelves that are just empty. And people in the story, they don't go very often because information is limited by what is deemed safe and appropriate. And it's much easier to take things away in that environment than it is to create. And in the story, the things that people check out are tracked and it's used against them, which doesn't exactly foster curiosity or a desire to create either. So, or a desire to even learn about anything. But thankfully, libraries in real life care very deeply about these things, and we do care about your privacy. Another recurring piece of this novel is the interpretation of what Our Missing Hearts even means. Celeste Ng has dozens of explanations of what Our Missing Hearts actually means all throughout this book. And I've selected a few that I'm going to attempt to make sense of. So the first is, our missing hearts are the bridges between our past and our future. I thought this one could mean a great deal of things, but mostly that it emphasized that loss isn't the end of the journey. We go on, we carry that loss with us to the future. And speaking of it like a bridge made it feel like it was a journey, like you were going from one place to the next. But it could be from one loss to the next too. It doesn't necessarily say that this has to be a positive journey, it just says that it is one. There's also no judgment about which way you choose. Maybe yours is from one loss to the next until you can find a way to get past that. But I think this one was just more of a, that it's truly not the end of the story, that we keep going, even though we lose things. The second one is, the missing heart is a reminder that love transcends physical boundaries. I actually really loved this one because it reminded me of something said in one of my favorite movies called Interstellar. Has anybody seen Interstellar? Yeah, it came out probably 10 years ago, but it was really good. And one of the quotes in it was, "Love is the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space. Maybe we should trust that even if we don't understand it." So we love the people we lose well beyond when they are gone. We also love people we haven't seen in years. And this book definitely shows again and again how love transcends physical boundaries. I don't think there's any question that Bird's mom loves him after they're separated. And I think that feeling, even if it's not exactly the same, is something that we're all familiar with. Loss is, after all, a universal feeling, even if we maybe haven't all experienced it the same way. Next up is, our missing hearts are the compasses that guide us through the labyrinth of life. To me, I felt like this was how the people we lose are often what we seek. So they inadvertently guide us along in life, whether we realize it or not. It's certainly the case for Bird. He literally goes in search of his mother after she leaves him. But his mother goes about it in a less obvious way. She had to leave her son, which was a loss. And so she seeks out others who have also lost their children, and she records their stories. It's definitely a force that drives her to keep on going after her loss. And since she found a new purpose in life, she found a new purpose in life since she wasn't allowed to be a mother any longer. And then finally, our missing hearts are the mirrors that reflect our deepest desires and dreams. And I had to think about this one for longer than the others, but I think to me, this one explains how we see ourselves in the people we lose. That could be the traits that we aspire to have that they had, or literally just similarities that exist between the two. But I think in seeing those things that we either want or we already have gives us motivation to obtain and grow those traits and skills, whatever they may be. And I spent time talking about this because I think that it was a pretty cunning literary device that she used. It's very repetitive. Our missing hearts is said over and over and over in this book. I think it became kind of like a motif, and though it changed and evolved, it became a mantra of sorts, or like a steady beat going on, if we want to continue the music metaphor that I've got going. And I think it held the book together. After all, this book is incredibly character driven. Bird does not have a plan to save the United States from pact. Nor is he part of a shadow organization working to put kids back together with their parents. He's just a 12-year-old child trying to make sense of the world that he's in and find his mom along the way. So I think the repetition helped kind of bring it all together and make it at least cohesive enough to be a book. And then this phrase also came from a poem that was, never designed to be a rallying cry for anything. But I think that that's true to life. We never know how the things that we write or say are going to affect people. And people do take those and they do make them their own. And then the repetition also shows how it was a rallying cry throughout the story for all people. And as for what I personally thought of it, I already told you that I enjoyed it, and I think it's a very important book. But I like to think of it as a great book club book. You know what I mean? I had my book club read this one and to pick their minds for this presentation. And I've run several book clubs in my career so far. And honestly, the best books aren't the ones that everyone loves. There's not a lot to talk about if you all love the book. Those conversations usually go, oh, that was just so good. You remember this part? Oh, that was amazing. It was so beautiful. That's how that book club goes the whole time. So I think that the best book club books are the ones that you can really dive into and has some meat that you can talk about. Maybe it's not super polished. Maybe it does cut a little deeper like this one does. However, that being said, I did think it was a little too literary to be enjoyable to read the whole time. It's still very well written and it offers a lot of things that you can talk about. But what I mean when I say a little too literary, how many of you, well, I'll just ask this first. How many of you read this book versus listened to it? Did you listen to it? Yeah. So in my book club, people pointed out when they listened to it, they didn't really think anything about how it was written. It's written in a way that you can make sense of. The people that read it, and I kind of fall into this camp, there are no quotation marks in this book anywhere. Yes. And like I said, some people didn't care. Some people, my undergrad is English, which has everything to do with literature. And so it did bother me a little bit. But I think that, hang on, I lost my place. It's just written. There's no quotation marks at all. Correct. But if you listen to it, then you can tell when it is dialogue. I mean, you can still tell in the book because they say he said and she said, those kinds of things. It's just that there's no quotation marks. So I just thought that was a pretty interesting thing to point out. And then I think also if you're, there's some parts of our brain that just get so used to seeing something that the absence of it is very loud, which maybe is why she chose not to use them. I mean, after all, this is a world where speaking out can get you in so much trouble. So your privacy is reduced in order to increase your sense of security. So literally nothing you say is safe. So I wondered if maybe that's why she chose not to use quotation marks. Because I have to imagine there is a reason, but I don't know what it is. That's my guess. So there are some things about the book that we do know for certain, because there's an author's note at the end, and she lays it out for us. So Celeste Ng says that she pulled inspiration from things that have happened in real life. The first is the history of removing children and families as a method of political control. It's been done all throughout history and all over the world, but specifically there are some pretty major instances of it in the United States. She brings up how enslaved families were split apart, government-run boarding schools for Indigenous children. They were designed specifically to strip them of their culture and language, our faulty foster care system, and most recently separating migrant families at the United States border. In fact, if you look at the timeline of these awful events, the United States government has either condoned or been the perpetrator in children separated from their families for the vast majority of our history as a country. Enslaved families were split apart as a means of control from the first settlers who brought them to America in 1619, and it continued beyond the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865. That's why we have Juneteenth, because there were people who were still being enslaved even past that. The government started separating Indigenous children from their family in 1860, and it continued until 1978. It was a long time. So as you can see, there's overlap there. So up until 1978, it's either government condoned or perpetrated. There are still a couple of those schools that remain open, but they're now under Native control, and they no longer have the "kill the Indian, save the man" motto that many of the government-run institutions held. The foster care system was taken over by state governments in the early 1900s. Previously, before that, it was overseen by religious organizations, and they did little to no background checks on the families requesting the kids. They also didn't keep very good records, so the kid would just go and then they would disappear into a new life that wasn't always great. And in 2017, immigrants coming into the United States without a permit were separated from their children as a rule. Thankfully, the media got a hold of that and really made people aware, and so they did their best to try and get those families back together, but there are still some who were never put back together. And that's very recent. Yeah. So another source of sorry guys, I know this is all a downer, but it's a heavy book. Another source of inspiration that Celeste Ng mentions about the anti-Asian discrimination in America following the COVID pandemic. So that's also very recent, but the United States also has a history of this, the biggest being the Japanese internment camps in World War II. I'll just share this reading list that she shared in the author's note in case anybody's interested in learning more about the discrimination against people of Asian descent in America. They are The Making of Asian American, The Making of Asian America by Erica Lee. Yellow Peril, An Archive of Anti-Asian Fear, edited by John Kuo Wei Chin and Dylan Yates. I never know how to spell that or pronounce that. Infamy, The Shocking Story of the Japanese American Internment in World War II by Richard Reeves. And From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial that Galvanized the Asian American Movement by Paula Ewing. She also got inspiration from McCarthyism, and she mentions Naming Names by Victor S. Novoski and The Age of McCarthyism, A Brief History with Documents by Ellen Schrecker and Philip Deary. For historical examples that echo what is happening right now, there's Perilous Times, Free Speech in Wartime by Jeffrey R. Stone. And for how anyone could possibly tolerate what is so clearly horrible active fact, there's When Paris Went Dark, The City of Light Under German Occupation, 1940 to 1944 by Ronald C. Rossbaum. However, there's also some hopeful things in the author's note. It's all not all down. The art protests that occur in the book are based off of the concept of guerrilla art that is being used right now. It's been used for decades. The most common example, or I say common, one of the ones she points out is the kids in a cage statue that popped up outside of the immigration center at the border. And then On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder talks about authoritarianism, how it rises, and then how you can combat it also. For read-alikes for Our Missing Hearts, I think it's very reminiscent of The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. That novel is also a dystopia in the not too distant future that emphasizes something we are currently dealing with and shows the danger of extremes. I already mentioned how it reminded me of The Giver by Lois Lowry, with birds' world seeming to lack color and the art protests that break up people's routines, forcing them to look at things differently, being kind of the color of the world. A couple of more recently published read-alikes for this book would be The School for Good Mothers by Justin Chan. It's about women who are taken and educated with the threat of their children being taken away if they're not good enough. So kind of instead of the kids being taken, now it's the mothers. And another one is Bewilderment by Richard Powers, and that offers the same father raising a son dynamic that Our Missing Hearts has. But the oppressive threat in this one is climate change, and there just not being much of a habitable world to live in very soon. So I will admit that this book is not at all a cozy, feel-good read that wraps up nicely in the end. But despite that, I still encourage you all to read it if you haven't, and if you have, to talk about it with someone like we have today, because it offers plenty to talk about. And I'll leave you with this quote that I think captures the essence of this book. We are not defined by our missing hearts, but by the courage with which we seek them. And thank you for joining me today. Are there any questions?
I just want to say your background in education comes through youth, and that was really life-changing for you. Because, I didn't like the books, but now I think it is everything you said was. And I think the reason learning comes so much of this thought of the boy, interpreting the thought of the father, the mother, people interpreting other people's thoughts. But I did a super job on that.
Thank you. Yes.
Is this the stream of consciousness?
I wouldn't say it's stream of consciousness, no. It's really written like a novel. You just there's no quotation marks. It's not that it's, I know that that's hard. If you didn't read it, that's kind of hard to point out, but like, it's literally just that anywhere that they're talking, it just says what they said. There's nothing to like indicate that that's what they're saying. But it is written in like novel form. It's not stream of consciousness or anything like that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's heavy. This is a heavy, heavy book. It definitely is all of those things. Too real, it hits very close to home. That's why I started this with saying like, this one is not the polished ones that she's done before. This one is designed to hurt. And it does. So mission accomplished, Celeste. But so for my book club, what I did is I told them up front, like, hey guys, I am doing this is a presentation and I would love for you to read this with me so that you can help me kind of like, put our brains together and more eyes on it is better. And so they knew that it was a kind of a tough read before we started it. So they were not mad at me. That doesn't mean everybody liked that book because like I said, it was pretty evenly split where there were some people who were like, oh, too much. It was too much. But then there were people who really loved it. So,
Did everybody finish it?
no, There were a couple of people who did not,
I did too.
yeah, a couple of people didn't even finish it, but it is, I pointed out that, this is very character driven. There's not a plot. This one, that it's so character driven, I think that you don't know there's no way to even guess what's gonna happen because it's literally just what this little boy does in the spur of the moment. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna go do this thing. So it can feel aimless at times, I think, which is one of the reasons why I don't think it's the most enjoyable book to read. I do think that it's very important. Yeah.
But it got to the part where books were disappearing off the library
Mm-hmm.
and the children were just being totally indoctrinated in school.
Yes.
That hit so close to home for me because I'm a retired educator.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't help but think of what's going on in our state right now.
Yes. This book cuts really, it's very close to home. Because, that is well, it's not even it is what we are up against right now. There's not even a reason to mince words about it. Like, that's what some people want. They want that control, and they know that the way you do it is with kids that don't know any better.
I called it Ryan Walter's wet dream.
That's so timely. It's so good. That's funny. That's very funny. Yes.
I wish I had read it. And I would have quit, but I'm on the darn committee that we have it. And I'm pretty sure most of us who voted for it hadn't read it and based it on her past. And even though you've done a beautiful job, I'm sorry I had to think about it again today. I don't think it served any purpose. I mean, all we have to do is turn on the TV or read the newspaper to know that these threats are very real.
I think that's fair, because like I said, it doesn't offer a how-to on how to fix it. I do think that, so another thing that she had mentioned in the author's note that I didn't say was, she read, and I don't have the book in front of me, so I don't remember what it was, but she read something that changed her mind about one person being able to change essentially really dire things like this. And that was kind of her thought with the mom, even though you don't know how it ends or what happened, that her planting the idea in people's minds could have been the turning point to flip this world around. But it is very ambiguous.
Well, and I'm a child psychologist, so I just came reading about, I mean, it was just pure abuse to this little boy. He lost his mother, and essentially, because that was never explained to him, or the grieving process happened, he basically lost his father.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
And it just seemed a cruel way to make the point she was trying to make.
Yeah, I do think, but I think that was her whole point, was that it will be cruel. Yeah, well, not cruel to you personally, just that if this comes to pass, it is cruel.
It is.
And there isn't a nice way to.
It has come. So
Yeah.
your history and what's going on right now with immigration.
Yeah.
So,
But it is tough to read for sure.
you called it a warning. Was that a reviewer, or was that her, or was that you?
It was me.
I think that's a good way to.
And it was actually someone in my book club who, while she was reading this, she would come in and tell me about it before we were even in book club. And that was something that she had said, was she came in and she finished it before I did. And she was like, this book is a warning book. And I was like, oh, I like that. Because I think that it is. And that doesn't also, right, it doesn't make it comfortable at all, which I don't think was her aim, but but I like, that's kind of how I started advertising it. Like, if someone comes in and they want, are interested, I just let them know, hey, this is a warning book. I mean, I think it's very important, but this is not a cozy, everything wraps up at the end story. You're gonna think about it for a long time afterwards. So if you're looking for cozy, this ain't it. Yes. Mm,
Well, I'm sitting here wondering, having not read the book,
mhm,
anything else you read,
mhm.
are you left with this book, are you left with the feeling of, I've gotta speak up, I've gotta do something, I've gotta stand up and be counted, I've gotta.
I think that's,
We already know that.
yeah, I think it depends. Like some people, there were some in my book club who read this and they felt like hopeless and they didn't even
Yeah.
some of them didn't even finish it. But I thought, like when I got to the end and I read it, I thought the end was more hopeful. It's not clean, it's still, you don't know 100% how it ends up. But it is, his mom sharing stories of these other families who've lost their kids in their words.
Well,
And she's reading it out loud and it's being everyone can hear it all across the city.
from a little bit
So.
I've read in the news, not about Ukraine and Russia.
Mhm,
Russia had taken the Ukrainian children.
mm,
But I've also recently read that Ukrainian children are coming back and I don't know if they're being reunited with families, but they're at least coming back to Ukraine. Which to me would be hopeful.
mhm.
What was done would be reversed. Well, it won't be reversed. I know, because it's damage.
Yeah.
But. Well, then the Navalny dies and there's the mother, the voice that tried so hard to change the atmosphere in a place like Russia.
Mhm.
And, so many aspects of missing parts. I was also gonna ask, have you in the library at Broken Arrow, I've heard the systems presentation on, challenged books. So I know the Tulsa City County Library does a great job, but if you had challenged books in the Broken Arrow, what were they?
They're all about gender.
Interesting.
We actually have a tough topics display up. And so it's the whole gamut, divorce, grief, my grandma died, religion, different religion books. I have two moms, I have two dads. So like, it's the whole, it's just called tough topics and it's kids' books. They're all together. And the gender ones always walk off and either are hidden somewhere that we find them later. But it's the gender ones that are super, even though that display has something for everyone, those are the ones that are picked up and moved so that they won't be available to other people.
You should tell them about your presentation that you're gonna do at the National Park.
Oh, okay, well, thank you. So tomorrow, I'm going to PLA. Yes, and I'm gonna present twice. It's the same thing. It's just they're having me do it in person one time and then recorded for the virtual conference the next day. But I'm a part of the Rainbow Alliance Affinity Group here at TCCL, and I'm actually the president of it. But they created something called the Diverse Display Guide. And so what I'm presenting on is kind of the creation of this guide, giving it to all the librarians that come so that they can make it their own and bring it back to their branches. But the heart of it is there should be diverse books on every display. They should be in every book list. They should be in every display because, and this is something that I say in the presentation, displays are the most visible part of your library. And if people walk in and they don't see themselves, it's not a welcoming space. So they should be on all of the displays. And also, it kind of makes them less of a target if they're just always there all the time. If you only have a pride display, now that doesn't mean that you can't do highlighting displays, those are important too. But if you have these things on all of the displays that you do, it kind of normalizes it. And it makes everybody feel like they are welcome and they can be in the library, which is our whole thing. So, yeah, I'm presenting on the diverse display guide and also the collection audit that TCCL did that brought in so much more diverse books. So it's kind of two parts. We did a collection audit, then we wanted to make sure that we use those materials. So we used the diverse display guide to make sure that they were visible. And 82% of those things that we've bought have checked out. And they're checking out regularly. That's incredible. So people want them. And the publishing industry is finally kind of catching up. Huh? Yes, checked out and coming. That is, you're not wrong. Sometimes they check out and then they just disappear, and that's how they make sure nobody else can have them. But yes, but they're coming back. They're regularly checking out, which means that this is something that people want. The publishing industry, like I just said, they're finally getting on board and publishing more diverse materials. It's still very much straight, white, Christian, male, but it's getting better. And that's not even to say that those books are bad. It's just, it's not great if it's 90% that and only 10% all of the other awesome, cool, amazing things that we are. Yeah. There was one more I wanted just before.
Hey, before we know about something the last year.
That's true. That is 100% true. Yes. Well, thank you guys so much for having me.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.